Good morning.
Good morning.
I was wondering if you could touch on, when it comes to structural balance and the core, how you incorporate that into like the weekly programming for a client.
This is a great question because I kind of sit on the fence with core training. So I've been brought up by a lot of academics. The first mentor that I had was Charles Poliquin, and he discusses core training as the core muscles have the lowest potential for hypertrophy of all muscles. And he says squats and deadlifts, big compound movements like this are better for the core than all of the basic compound isolation movements that we see performed in the gym today. Crunches, planks, all of these things. So this is how I pretty much based a lot of my training. I didn't really train much core, and I didn't really see much of a weakness. The next person that I'll quote is Dr. Brad Schoenfeld. You guys could find it. He did a presentation. It's on YouTube. If you search it, if you put the right words in, I'm not sure what the search would be, but he discussed the hypertrophy difference between squats and planks, and squats were superior to planks. So someone like him, who I hold in a very high regard for his research in hypertrophy, also states the same thing. That if you are performing, your squats and deadlifts, your big compound movements, this is enough for your core strength. Now, I also work with one of the best rehabilitation specialists in the world, and that is Dr. Andrew Locke, who says that this is not true. Okay, so he does he's learned a lot of his spine health information from a fellow by the name of Dr. Stuart McGill. So he's got some of the best spine research in the world, and he talks about the value of core training. Now, I sit on the fence with this because I've got people on both ends that I respect in the highest regard. Some saying you need core training and some saying you don't. I personally don't provide core training for myself and most of my top level athletes, unless, of course, my athletes that I'm working with specifically ask to do core training. Okay, so this is an interesting one. This is moving towards training morale, okay? I've been holding a seminar at my gym this week, a mentorship, and I've been talking, yesterday I specifically spoke about this. When a client that you're working with wants to train a certain way, you have to factor in the exercises that they request. Is it going to be detrimental to their performance? So if I'm working with someone that says, I want to add core work in my training, okay, I'd say, okay, great. It's not going to be detrimental to your performance. This is how I would do it. Okay. My preference in core work is holds. So isometric contractions, anti-rotation exercises. Okay. So things like a Pallof press. Are you familiar with that exercise?
Yeah. A
Pallof press. So this is where the core's function is to stabilize the trunk. Okay. And it's putting transverse forces through the trunk. Okay. Suitcase carries, suitcase lifts, renegade rows, and planks. This is my preference in core training if I was to include it for any of my athletes. Okay. And the reason why I've turned to this is because a lot of the research, if you're up to date with the research and you've got your favorite authorities in academia that we listen to and trust, one of my favorites is Stuart McGill, okay, when it comes to spine research and core training. Now, a lot of the research has a lot of limitations. Now, one of the biggest limitations in the research that's available is who we are performing these studies on. So when you hear about, 8-week studies on muscle hypertrophy or 12-week studies, the fact is, how much muscle can we build in that short period of time? Okay, and the answer is not much. Okay, so we don't really have much long-term research on any of these topics. But when it comes to, and then the next point to that is, who are we performing the research on? In most instances, the people that we're performing research on is at the very best intermediate level gym goers or athletes, okay? And more commonly, people in a rehabilitation setting, okay? Because most people that are at a high level with their training don't have the time to allocate to research and to studies. So when a scientist comes along to a professional athlete and says, hey, can you allocate 12 or 16 or 20 weeks to my study? Their answer is, No, I can't because I don't have the time because I'm training for my sport. Okay, now one person who does have access to professionals is Stuart McGill. And you could find this study. It was not really a study. It was just a test that was performed on an athlete called George St. Pierre. Have you heard of this person?
No.
So George St. Pierre is known as one of the best UFC fighters in history.
Oh, right here.
Now, Stuart McGill, taped up George St. Pierre. He strapped him up with to test the activity of his core muscles during his day-to-day training. So the task was for George St. Pierre to pick up a boxing bag, similar size and weight to himself, pick it up, dump it on the ground, jump on top of it, and ground and pound it. And while he was doing this, he was testing to see the role of his core, the role of the core muscles during this activity. Now, this defied my belief system. I used to do a lot of martial arts. And I used to say, I'm doing a lot of great core training with my rotation, with my boxing and kicking. But what he found at the highest level is there was very little movement of the core, very little movement of the trunk, very little movement of the spine. The role of the core muscles was to hold the trunk still so that the extremities could do their job. Okay, so this is where he draws the conclusion that his favorite method to train the core is with isometric contractions. So holding the trunk still. Okay. And that's why I choose exercises like what I just mentioned. So, so there's my answer. It's a very long-winded answer. I generally love to perform my main core exercises, my squats and deadlifts, pull-ups, presses. Okay. And I do believe that this strengthens the core sufficiently. Okay. But if you wanted to include some core training, those are my go-to exercises.
I love that. Thank you so much. Yeah, that's always the camp that I've been in as well. The whole just nail your compounds and then you don't need that much additional core training. So it's really great to hear your insight. Thank you.
Most welcome.
Thanks, Seb.